I'd like to introduce or have Bob Levers, President and CEO of the Samaritan Institute, introduce our speaker today. Bob.
President Jim and Rotarians, it's my pleasure to introduce for our Veterans Day celebration Dr. Tom Yechout. He's a professor of aeronautical engineering at the United States Air Force Academy. He has an earned doctorate in engineering degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Kansas. We have anybody from the University of Kansas here? All right, got a few. There you go, Tom. He is also involved with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics as an associate fellow. More importantly, he is an Air Force veteran with 25 years of service, which included development and flight testing of the F-111, the A-7 aircraft, the F-4 Phantom, and with extensive experience with the design, development, and flight testing of the A-10, which is the subject of his presentation today. I will tell you that Tom is the recipient of numerous awards, including the NASA Outstanding Achievement Award, the Frank Schuyler Award for Research Excellence, and the Heisler Award as the Outstanding United States Air Force Academy Professor and Educator. He is also honored as a Carnegie Foundation 211 Colorado Professor of the Year. In addition, he has served as the principal investigator for numerous wind tunnel investigation programs, holds the patent on the Reichlet wingtip modification on aircraft, and has authored over 200 technical publications. But most important to me, Tom, he's my friend, and we go biking together, bicycling, not biking together. So I introduce to you and present to you Tom Yechout for our presentation.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. My goodness, Bob, the best part of that introduction was the last part. I'm your friend. Close to the mic. What an honor.
Let's try this one.
That's probably better. What an honor and privilege to be here with the Rotary Club. Let me congratulate you for all of the wonderful work that you do with the community and your spirit of giving back. That's the spirit that we try to instill at the Air Force Academy. Too close? How's that? Okay, we'll do better. Okay, what I would like to do today is give you just a snapshot of an airplane that I had the privilege of working with over the years during my Air Force career and actually even my post-Air Force career. But the presentation will not be given by exactly the person that Bob introduced. It'll be given by a young captain about 40 years ago that happened to fall into a very special job. And that was leading the flight test of the ugly duckling aircraft that didn't quite have the favor of the Air Force, like the F-15, the F-16, and some of the other airplanes. Well, I think I was the only one available to maybe do that job, but it turned out to be a wonderful life experience. Okay, so the A-10. I realize that many of you are not that familiar with airplanes, but I would like you to at least walk out of here knowing a little bit more about this wonderful airplane. You can see a picture of it up there. The A-10 is a close air support airplane. So what does that mean? Well, let's see if we have the range here. There we go. Okay, close air support. That's providing firepower to our ground troops, Army and Marines, in close proximity, that are engaged in close proximity to the enemy. How did we get the A-10? That's probably your first question. Out of the Vietnam experience, we identified the need for a close air support airplane that had better capabilities than anything that we had in the inventory. At the same time, that that was happening, the Soviet Union was building up tremendous ground forces. They had a 4-to-1 advantage in tanks over the United States at that time. So the requirements were combined into the concept of let's mount the most powerful cannon ever developed in the world, really, on an aircraft that could destroy tanks but also provide close air support. The AX competition kicked off in the late 60s, and the two finalists were the Northrop Corporation with the A9 and the Fairchild Republic Corporation with the A10. Let's take a little closer look at those airplanes. The Northrop A9 was a very conventional airplane. You can see the high wing, the single vertical tail, the engines nacelled and integrated into the fuselage. On the other hand, the A10 was very unusual. And for those, just out of curiosity, how many have ever seen an A10? Oh, well, that's more than I expected. Fantastic. Okay. Very unconventional. The engines are potted in the cells on the aft part of the fuselage. Okay, it was a low-wing design, and it had twin vertical tails, harkening back to the B-24 and B-25 of World War II. Very unconventional. And some people, not me, would maybe refer to it as being ugly because it was so unconventional. The requirements on these airplanes are stated there. Simply, it had to be lethal. It had to be able to kill tanks and provide close air support. It had to be survivable, and as we're going to see, the A-10 is probably the most survivable airplane that we've ever built. Okay? It had to be maintainable, which means simple, and it had to be responsive. And one of the unique features that distinguishes the A-10 from any other airplane is its loiter time. It can loiter over the battlefield for up to 2 hours. It carries enough fuel to perform that and be responsive to the ground troops. And it had to be low cost. If you can believe this, in today's world, way back when I was associated with the airplane, the design to cost on the airplane was $1.4 million. Now, that, I know that seems like a lot depending on where you're coming from, but it's nothing when you look at military airplanes. There was a fly-off. I was part of that fly-off, and the A-10, the ugly duckling, emerged as the winner for a lot of good reasons. And we're going to try to give you a snapshot on what those were today. But your first question is probably, why does it look like that? Okay? Well, the first thing we'll talk about is the gun. And there's only one the gun in the Air Force, and that's the GAU-8 30-millimeter Gatling gun. Okay, it's a gun capable of firing 60 rounds per second, a very high-speed trajectory, and the gun itself, with the ammo drum, weighs about 4,000 pounds, and it's about 20 feet long. Compared up there to the Volkswagen, you can get an idea of how big that gun is. Well, in order to mount that gun, the airplane had to be designed around the gun. In fact, some people will refer to the airplane as a holster for the gun. You can see how the gun is integrated into the airplane. The bullets that it fires, compared to a beer bottle, the bullets, the whole and casing are over a foot long. They can penetrate the heaviest armor on a tank, and we use a mix of armor-piercing and high incendiary explosive ammo in order to destroy basically any type of armor or artillery. But why are the engines placed on the back end? Fighter airplanes don't do that. Well, there's several good reasons. First of all, I want you to look at where the barrel of the gun is up in the nose of the airplane and where the intakes of the engines are. Let me see if I can get this to work. Notice that there's a good distance between that. And the reason that there needs to be is that this gun puts out a tremendous amount of gun smoke, and engines don't like gun smoke. They'll flame out if that happens. With the A-10's design, about 2/3 of the gun smoke goes under the wing, and about 1/3 goes over the wing, but it's got that distance to mix with air so that the engines stay running. Another very important feature is that the engines are completely separated from the fuel cells in the airplane. In fact, if you have an engine fire, you can let the engine basically burn off the airplane and it'll stay flying. Okay, with any other fighter airplane, an engine fire that you can't put out is typically a bailout. Another reason, notice the location of the engines relative to the wing. The wing shields the engine intakes from ground debris that might be kicked up by the landing gear. This is especially important to meet a requirement for being able to operate the airplane off of rough fields and deteriorating runways. And it's the only airplane over in the Middle East that we've been able to operate off those kind of deteriorating runways. To illustrate that, notice this view of the airplane and how the wing shields the engines. Finally, you might wonder about the dual vertical tail configuration. Okay, it forms a box. What is the advantage of that? Well, there's several advantages of that. First of all, if you get one of the vertical tails blown off, the engine maintains directional stability. In other words, it can fly and keep the pointy end into the wind. Okay, only airplane that I know of that can do that. But more than that, the box that's formed by the horizontal tail and the vertical tail, if you think about the hot spot on the airplane that an IR missile would seek, focus your eyes as I hold up this model on the engine exhausts, okay? And as the airplane maneuvers and jinks, what happens to your line of sight? Is it blocked by the box that the horizontal and vertical tail form? Yes. Okay, so a couple of very nice results of going with that design. Okay, well, before I leave this slide, I want to tell one quick story. And that is, in development of this airplane during the initial flight test program, we had several big challenges, but one of them was that we wanted to be able to make this airplane stay controllable if you lost all of your hydraulic systems. Okay, that would be like driving an 18-wheel Mack truck without any steering, but just give you a couple of cables to move those front wheels. Okay, the way we did that was with a unique manual reversion system, where if all of the hydraulic systems were lost, the airplane can be flown on just cables and push rods and pulleys, something like a little Cessna. Okay, but this is a big airplane that has very heavy control forces. One of the reasons I don't have a lot of hair is we really had a tough challenge to make that work on a big airplane like this. But one of the smartest things that we did was when we chose our test pilot for this program, we chose the smallest, lightest, I don't want to say weakest, no test pilot is weak, but least strong test pilot to develop this system, because we couldn't really predict who would ever need to use it, what size pilot. Okay, well, armed with that, let's go to the next slide and take a look at a couple airplanes that have illustrated how tough the airplane really is. During Gulf War I, a pilot named Captain Paul Johnson brought back an airplane after taking a SAM hit over Iraq, the airplane that's shown here. And I don't know if you can see that very clearly, but basically the entire leading edge of the airplane has been blown off. One of the many unique features of the A-10 is that it has 3 main spars in each wing. Most airplanes only have 2. The A-10 was designed so that any one of those spars could be severed and the airplane would still maintain wing integrity. However, Paul Johnson showed that the airplane was even stronger than that. He brought this airplane back with basically 2 spars severed. He brought it back on 1 spar. Here you get a little idea of the damage from the front and also from the front. But the thing that pleases me the most is that the reason he was able to bring it back was because of that manual reversion system that we worked so hard to make usable. During Gulf War II, Captain Kim Campbell took a SAM hit over Baghdad in the rear end of the airplane that knocked out both hydraulic systems, and she had to switch to manual reversion. This is one of my favorite pictures. You see how big Kim Campbell is? She probably weighs about 115 pounds. Thank goodness we picked a small test pilot, okay? Because Kim Campbell was able to bring that airplane back on manual reversion. And a particularly neat event for me in my life was that shortly after that happened, Kim Campbell came by the Air Force Academy just to chat about development of the manual reversion system and how she was so thankful that it worked as advertised. You can see some more of the damage here on Kim's airplane. Well, I'll share with you a couple of development stories. As we take a look at the competitor for the A-10, the A-9, I want you to notice where the intakes are on the engine. Those were about 3 feet above the ground. We expressed a concern about that configuration to the program director, indicating that we felt the airplane would be very susceptible to foreign objects being sucked into the intakes. The intakes are like big vacuum cleaners. Well, the program director said, quantify it. Well, what does that mean to a young captain? Oh, yes, sir, we'll quantify it. I don't have any idea how to do it, but we'll quantify it. Well, we went back and thought, how can we do this? And what we came up with was what we called the cornflake test. We got 3 boxes of cornflakes, put them out in front of, out in front of the intakes, right out here, ran the engines up on the ground and recorded it with high-speed cameras. It was the most beautiful thing you ever saw. Cornflakes were sucked up right off the ground, went right through the intakes, through the engines, and we saw little sparks coming out the back that we called post-toasties. So we bundled all of that up, sent it to the SPO director, and you know what he said? He said, if you did it on the A-9, you got to do it on the A-10. This is a competitive fly-off. So we did it on the A-10, and you can imagine not one cornflake twitched as we ran the engines up because of that unique configuration. Another interesting quick story concerns the leading edge of the airplane. I've shared with you several of the neat features of the A-10 and why the configuration looks the way that it does. But one of the big disadvantages of this configuration was identified after Flight 15 when both engines flamed out during a high G turn. And if you notice on the airflow has to go up and over the wing and then into the intakes. And what was happening was the stall on the wing was initiating and causing very disruptive flow to go into the intakes. This is like the flow that you might experience on the back of a minivan. Very separated flow, us aero engineers call it. And that presents problems for fan jet engines, okay? In other words, they have trouble digesting it. So we went to the SPO director and identified this problem. And do you know how he reacted to it? He reacted with 2 words: fix it. Now, that seemed fairly trite to me at the time, but as I've thought about it over the years, I think it was a great leadership move because it expressed confidence in us in the test team, and he realized that we were the closest to what was going on. Not that we weren't under a lot of pressure, okay? Well, how did we fix it? After several iterations, if you look closely at the airplane, you'll see a leading edge slat. And that leading edge slat right there basically provides a channel, something like a garden hose nozzle, to speed up the flow and keep it attached. And I'll share with you another of my favorite pictures. If you look closely, you'll see in this picture that the flow with the slat out is nice and smooth going into the intakes. Over here, the flow is separated, and over here, we still have good flow in order to keep the ailerons, the roll control surfaces, in good flow. So the airplane is actually sort of a thing of beauty when you think about how we did that. Okay, well, the top 2 pictures are probably the most feared thing that any of our enemies can see on the ground right now. The front end view of an A-10 with that big gun, okay? The bottom picture is probably the best thing that our ground soldiers can see right now because they know they've got the A-10 to support them. I'll share with you one last story. I was on an airplane flight back from Atlanta to Colorado Springs, and I sat next to a young Army captain. And I asked him, I said, "Have you ever served in the Middle East?" And he said, "Yes, sir. I just returned 2 months ago. I was a company commander on the ground." And then I said, "Did you see any A-10s over there?" And I can tell you this, I didn't have to say another word. For the next 20 minutes, he told me how great the A-10 was. And all I could do is feel very, very satisfied. So, with that, Darlene or whoever, do we have time for about a 3.5-minute video or not? I don't know.
I think we do.
We do? Okay, Lauren, maybe you could trigger that. I want to show you one mission, just one of many, where the A-10 saved a lot of American lives.
You're looking through the eye of the gun camera as an A-10 Warthog bears down on insurgents who have ambushed 90 coalition soldiers in eastern Afghanistan. They're now pinned down on a ridgeline. It is the beginning of what was, by all accounts, one of the epic air-to-ground battles of the war. The A-10s are flying so low, enemy fire is punching holes in their aircraft. They return fire as thunderstorms roll through the valley. The lead A-10 is piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Zurkowski, call sign Zuko.
The enemy knew the weather was rolling in, and they orchestrated an ambush.
Though most of the footage is classified, the story of the 13-hour battle circulated quickly across Bagram Airfield when the Thunderbolts from the 104th Fighter Squadron made it back. Zuko, who is with the Maryland Air National Guard, and his wingman Metro faced withering enemy fire. As the visibility dimmed, winds came up and their fuel ran low. But if they turned back or deviated to refuel, there's little doubt the ambushed coalition forces would have taken heavy casualties. So Zuko and Metro dipped in and out of the valley, unleashing the hellfire of their 30mm Avenger 7-barrel Gatling guns. The weapon, which stretches half the length of the aircraft, fires 4,200 1-pound rounds per minute. It can cut an armored vehicle in half.
And one's coming up in from the south.
The A-10's appearance and its signature sound when on the attack make it the most intimidating aircraft in the sky.
It has a suicide lines. They know it's the A-10. They can hear the airplane. The enemy tends to withdraw.
But this time, they didn't, and Zuko unloaded everything he had.
The first thing I did to suppress the fires was do a show of force. I did 3 shows of force, followed by a rocket pass to confirm that I had the correct area in sight of where the enemy was. And on that rocket pass, I received some small arms fire that hit the tail of the airplane here. That's the repair. And then I was also hit the speed brake panel over here.
When Zuko instructed Metro to refuel at a KC-135 orbiting a half-hour away, Zuko alone, above the enemy, kept firing and taking fire. The coalition forces had been split in the ambush. He had to choose his targets in near-zero visibility very carefully. He made increasingly difficult combat maneuvers, flying low and slow, emptying his Gatling gun.
I was stretching the gas, providing the support they needed with the gun.
Finally, another wave of A-10s was called in. Zuko, holding out as long as he could, made it back to base, flying on fumes. There were no serious injuries to coalition soldiers.
We were able to get all 90 troops out. There were a couple injuries. Very successful mission.
Zuko, who in civilian life is a 777 captain for United Airlines, and his wingman Metro, prevented what could have been one of the Afghan war's darkest days.
Wow. Lauren, there we go. Maybe get to the next slide. What a privilege to be with you. I wanted to share just 2 last thoughts. The first one is to all the veterans, thank you for your service. Obviously, we all have unique sacrifices in our background. One of the things that really brought it home to me was about 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to be at Normandy for the 60th anniversary of D-Day, and I was just walking around the cemetery, American cemetery at St. Laurent, France. In fact, I was talking with Anne a little bit about that. And a gentleman tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I was an American veteran. And when he found out that I was, he asked me to be part of the flag lowering ceremony that day. And I can tell you that 2 emotions ran through me. The first one was that the real heroes are the ones that gave it all. And at that cemetery in Normandy, France, there's over 9,000 GIs that gave it all. The second thing that hit me was I was extremely proud to be part of something this important and bigger than me. With that, let me leave you with this. In my view of the world at the Air Force Academy, the future looks very bright for the type of military leaders that are coming up to step in the footsteps of those that are getting up there in the years. Okay, I see these young people every day. They have integrity, they have service before self, and they strive for excellence in all they do. America is still producing probably the best youth of any country in the world. And with that, I thank you for listening today. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, and the significance of what you've done is very apparent. We have time for maybe just one question, if we have a quick one. Yes, right in the back.
My understanding is shortly before Desert Storm, the Air Force, one of the Iraqis, the Air Force wanted to get rid of the Warthog. And the Army said they would take it, the Air Force kept it. Now it's my understanding the Air Force wants to get rid of the Warthog again, and if anybody stops them from doing it, it'll be Congress.
That's absolutely accurate. It's a depressing thing to see my Air Force want to basically retire the A-10 right now, especially with everything that's going on in the Middle East. All I can say is the Air Force explanation is they have many roles to be responsible for, and the A-10 tends to be a single mission airplane. However, unofficially, I will say that the A-10, as you allude to, has been under attack in the past and survived. Under attack from the funding standpoint, and obviously under attack by our enemies, and survived. So you're correct, it is Congress that's delaying the retirement of the A-10. You know, it may take another active engagement by the A-10 in a current conflict in order to extend its life. So that's about all I can say. Well,
What's the origin of the Warthog?
I'm not sure anybody really knows. What's the origin of the name Warthog was the question. I've heard several stories about it. What I think is probably the most accurate is that a young fighter pilot walked out to the airplane one day and said, "That looks like a warthog to me," and it stuck.
Okay.